By way of introduction, we'll go ahead and get started. Some people may still join us. But my name's Pam Schwartz. So I'm the Chief Curator of the Orange County Regional History Center in downtown Orlando, in case there's anybody joining us who isn't local. So I oversee both our collections and our exhibitions departments and sort of how they marry together to make the beautiful exhibits that we have in the collection. And my co-presenter.
I'm Catherine Duffy. I'm the Curator of Exhibitions. And so as Pam mentioned, we have a really talented team, and my job is to help work with that team and manage that team to fulfill our visions for our exhibitions. But my work also includes researching and writing and collaborating with the team on design elements and themes and colors and you name it, start to finish.
So yeah, we do. We have a really super talented team. Our museum is, I mean, I always think of it as like on the small side because there's a lot of huge mega museums out there, but we're, I guess, technically really a medium-sized museum. We have about 25 employees, depending on the season. Our departments, I think, is like 14. So the collections and exhibits department's about 14 people. So we make up a good majority of the museum in that way. We've both, I've been at the museum just about 5 years, exactly 5 years and a couple of weeks here. And Catherine's been around for how long?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half. So
yes.
Different things going on. But this is Coffee with a Curator, so I hope everybody does have their coffee. It's a lot more of an informal program than some of the things we do. It's normally when we do this at the museum, we actually have coffee and pastries for you all. So we apologize you're missing out on that. But hopefully we'll get back there. And it's just really very conversational and again, informal. Sometimes we tack on a gallery tour. But we've done a lot of different programming around Ocoee. And so this one it's sort of meant to be, again, conversational, but behind the scenes. So if we don't talk about something that you would like us to, just put it in the chat box. That's what it's there for. We don't have like the Q&A box. You might have seen that in some other ones. We don't have that enabled. Just put it in the chat box. And if questions, comments, whatever it is, stories to share, everybody can sort of read those. But do feel free to ask. If we don't get to your question right away, we'll come back to it at the end, but we probably will do a few questions in between. I'm going to repeat our disclaimer that Catherine said earlier, but we are at home, we're teleworking because A, it's Saturday, but B, we do this now. So we have dogs. And Catherine also has a child. So if you hear saxophones and dogs barking, we cannot be held responsible. We will mute ourselves. So if I stop in the middle of sentence, we've trained ourselves. If I stop, Catherine finishes and vice versa. So we've gotten really good at picking up where the other one has left off. But we apologize for any of those things. There's not we can do about it. So we'll go ahead and get started. I don't know everybody's background. It looks like for the people who were able to answer in the chat box and anybody new who's joined us, we asked 2 questions to pass the time a little bit. So feel free to drop in the chat box whether you've been to the exhibit or not, and whether or not you came to our other Coffee with a Curator. But we realized some people might be coming into this as a first program with us, or maybe they haven't been to the exhibit. Maybe they don't even know what the exhibit content is. So we do want to offer a bit of just a really quick overview of the massacre itself. We're going to kind of look at some pictures of the exhibition while we do that, so that you can kind of wrap your head around the physical space and the content, but we're not giving a full virtual tour. This is probably going to be a really quick 5-minute overview, and then we'll come back to some of those things. And Catherine, stop me if I just like keep going and give a full tour.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just hard to control myself.
So I got my ear. That'll be your.
I won't see you because I'm going to share my
screen.
So
I'll text you.
Okay, perfect. I should look at my phone. La 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 la. Oh, I guess we could have had this up at the beginning. It's very official looking. All right, so Coffee with the Curator. I'm going to let Catherine watch the chat because I have learned I can't like do both at the same time.
I'm on it.
So our program today does center around, it stems from an event. So the Ocoee Massacre happened over November 2nd and 3rd, 1920. as a majority. It was an event that was sort of culminating for a long time, I think, and it had long lasting effects. It wasn't just over 2 days, but that's sort of when the thick of it happened. If you're not familiar with the Ocoee Massacre, I will give just a very, very brief account, because that is like a whole program just talking about those couple of days. But the Ocoee Massacre essentially happened in Ocoee, which is here in Orange County, and November 2nd was voting day, 100 years ago, just a couple of months past here now, 100 years ago. And a man by the name of Moses Norman, who was a Black man, a labor broker and community member in Ocoee, who'd lived there for substantially 20, 30 years, and along with many of the other residents. The community at the time was about a third Black and 2/3 white, and all intermixed, intermingled in the way the community was set up. He went to try to exercise his right to vote and was turned away from the polls. Now, the hardest thing about the Ocoee Massacre is there's a ton of misinformation out there. There is, whether that's a matter of a misunderstanding, a game of telephone, history as it's misremembered over time, whether it's intentionally obfuscated, there's a lot of versions of the story. And so we do keep our version, try to keep it to the facts. There's a lot of options of what might have happened after Moses was turned away from the polls. But we do know that later that night, a white mob went to the home of probably his friend and fellow labor broker, July Perry, another Black man, and violence ensued. A massacre broke out, and this white group that had gone, shots were fired, and homes were burned in the Black community. And so at the end of the night, again, there's a lot of details in here. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But at the end of the night, July Perry was lynched. An unknown number of Black residents of Ocoee were murdered or injured. A majority of the Black community had fled, some never to return, others to try to sell their properties and things like that. But it's a really horrific event, and it's something that happened right here. And again, that's a very cursory overview. We'll tell you more parts of the story as we're sort of going through here. Just to kind of do a really quick walk through the exhibit, and Catherine, feel free to butt in if you want to share something specific on any of these screens. Okay. We started working on this exhibit about 3 years ago. Like I said, I keep meaning to go back and figure out the exact date we started, because I know the email that sort of kicked it off. But about 3 years ago, it was brought to our attention, a local group called the Democracy Forum. And then there's the Alliance for Truth and Justice locally, different groups who've done work on this over time, who came to us and said, it's the 100th year mark. Would you do an exhibition? And the Democracy Forum, who had done some work in this on this in the 90s, wanted to donate their archives. And so we said, absolutely. And that's when we dug in. So this is what we call a temporary exhibition at our museum, or a special exhibition. It's up currently. It opened in October. It'll be open. We've extended the date now. Actually, it was supposed to be open through February 14th. We'll talk more about that at the end. We're kind of fortunate and unfortunate to be able to do that. We had weddings canceled because of the pandemic, which of course is a loss in income, but it does allow us to keep this exhibit up through Black History Month, which is really excellent. We worked on this for 3 years and put so much heart and soul and effort into it. This is sort of the entryway that you see when you come in. We were very intentional about the design and the colors. We talk about that a lot in our first Coffee with a Curator. I do encourage you, if you like the behind the scenes, to go watch that. We really talk a lot about the intentionality behind the design methodology. But this is what you see when you first walk in, if you've not gotten to come. When we started on this exhibit, a big part of the situation was that there was nothing with which to build it. We had some archives, we had some starter research, but when a community burns down, what's left to show for it? And when the families spread out all across the nation, how do you connect with them? And so we decided to broaden the scope of the exhibit. So the exhibit's actually in 3 sections, sort of pre-Ocoee, which is the 1500s up to 1920, the Ocoee section, which covers those few days and weeks after. And then we bring from that story, the post-Ocoee, all the way up through Black Lives Matter today. And Catherine will talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the challenges of this exhibit. But we thought we were going to have to broaden the topic so that we could fill the 3,200 square foot space. And what we ended up with was 3 separate exhibits. easily 3 separate exhibits that we could have done. So this is that pre-Ocoee first section. And it covers from pre-enslavement and enslavement in Florida of African individuals here, brings you up through the Civil War, all the way up until 1920 election, and talking about what was sort of percolating, a lot of the things that probably caused or allowed both the Ocoee Massacre to happen.
Pam, I'm going to jump in. If you could go back to the last slide. I just want to mention, because we're talking, I think a little bit, we'll focus on some of the challenges that we faced while creating this exhibition. And one thing, whether it was a challenge we created for ourselves or what, I don't know. But you mentioned that we really wanted to stick to the facts, not just in the section of the exhibition where we focus on the Ocoee Massacre story right before and then following, but also throughout the entire exhibition. And so we challenged ourselves to use primary source materials when researching this exhibition. And in fact, when you visit the exhibition, there is a citations booklet that you can just take with you on your way out that shows you all of the primary sources that we consulted for the exhibition. And although there are many respected, talented, and accomplished historians that have done research on the history, essentially the history of Black people in Florida across in many different ways. And there's the seminal book written by Dr. Paul Ortiz, Emancipation Betrayed, which we certainly consulted. We wanted to create an exhibition where we were just providing the facts and not be too heavy-handed with the interpretations, so that visitors could really just see very quickly and very directly, this is what it was, this is what it was like. So what you're looking at, this picture here, is the first section of the exhibition where we start in the 1500s. And some of the challenges with that is one of the primary source collections that we consulted was the East Florida papers. They're housed at the University of Florida. I believe the Library of Congress has some, but those are all written in Spanish, but it's ye old Spanish. It's Spanish of the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. And so translating that, and it's all handwritten, of course, was among some of the challenges that we experienced, but also very rich, and that now we have access to this really amazing collection about early Florida history that we can use in future projects, or I don't know if you mentioned, Pam, that we're planning on updating our entire museum, but certainly for researching some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a weird question, but I'm going to ask, can you guys see the chat box when I have it up when I'm screen sharing? Like, is it in the way?
No.
Cool, good, then I can watch both. That's nice. Great. So yeah, as Catherine said, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens after this exhibit towards the end of this presentation, and our big master plan in redesigning the whole museum is definitely going to be a big part of that. So, okay, so that's the first section. The first section covers several hundred years. We just did it in like 30 seconds, but if you have questions, let us know. So this is the actual Ocoee section, and the light sort of hits these seams really strangely in this photo. But the Ocoee section actually steps back in time a little bit. It establishes how the town came to be. I do want to spend a second talking about, just because I don't think people came to our first, most of the people didn't come to our first Coffee with a Curator, but there's a couple of really important thing. There's a ton of important things throughout the entire exhibit, but a few things that are really, really important. You'll see the voting station. That's that wooden kiosk with the light bulb on top. We have several of those throughout the exhibit, and those are places where you're meant to stop and have an idea, to pause and express your voice. So you actually vote at those stations and you learn something. And this particular one asks you, would you call this event a massacre or a riot? Now think about what's been happening in the world in the last week, and the words we use are very important to describe these types of events and why they happen and the impact that they have. And so that's a question that we ask. We also ask about reinstating voting rights for individuals who've been incarcerated. We talk about reparations. The wall on the back here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the one with all the text and the screen on it, at the beginning, I gave you that sort of really cursory overview of the event. that wall is about 14 pages of text. And what we did is we took every single version of, well, I shouldn't say every version, but we took 129 versions of this story and we streamlined them into one massive account that you can follow what every single person said differently about every single fact. And it's a really interesting, when you take the time to stop and read that, you can start to see where the story was getting twisted and where things were so outlandish it didn't even make sense. But from that, this account on the right, just these 4 short paragraphs, that's essentially the account I gave you at the beginning. So you can see the difference between all of the misinformation that's out there versus what we can factually say. Now, that doesn't mean there's not elements of truth to the other wall. So that was a big part of the project. And if people are super interested, we can talk more about that because that is a bit of an overview. But each one of these different 129 items are sourced, or the different stories are sourced, in the screen in the middle. You can actually go and view each one. So like Catherine was saying, we wanted to source this. We want you to look at where's the information coming from. Is that information you should believe or not? This is moving along through the Ocoee section. You'll notice a cabin on the right. There's a lot of symbolism behind that cabin. And I'm not going to delve into that. I think we talked quite a bit about that in our first coffee with the curator. My dog might get going here. She's grumbling at something outside. But we also, in this section, you can actually see here, made an interactive land deed map. And that's really been a big star of the show in terms of people being really interested, because there hasn't been a full interactive map created. And what that map shows is all of the properties that were that at the time of the massacre were owned by Black landowners. Now, we have no idea where the other 50 or so families were renting that were in Ocoee, but we can show that, and it also shows the values of what those properties are worth today. And we know that the land owned by Black landowners that was taken from them in a variety of different ways, again, that's like a whole other presentation, is worth well over $10 million today, well over. And so that's a really important comparison to make, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation as well. The Ocoee section can't touch on all those different things. So we talk about the number of deaths and how we decide as historians what numbers to use. We talk about voting. We talk about the fact that the terror continued in Ocoee. It wasn't just one night everybody left. It continued for weeks and years. And then we talk about also the families. Some of the families, we're in touch with 9 or 10 different families now, and we're going to, again, have a whole different section about that a little bit later in the presentation. Oh, there's a landing map. I didn't think I had a picture. Changes and challenges, Catherine, that's one thing we can add to talk about, is updating that part of the exhibit as well in a few minutes. You'll notice the vinyl over that screen, that's the land deed map. It says 8 million and not 10 million, and that's because the research continues. That is the family wall. And then you'll see the purple beyond, that's where we're starting to move towards the post-Ocoee section. And the post-Ocoee section basically starts by stating that Ocoee wasn't the only event that happened here. We go through to talk about the Rosewood Massacre, the Groveland Four, the Harry and Harriet Moore bombing of their home in Mins into the 1950s. We go from there into civil rights, and on up to today. The very back wall, you'll see a large black and white photograph, and that is a photograph our staff took at a Black Lives Matter movement protest. And a young gentleman in the middle is holding up a sign that says July Perry at those protests 100 years later, which is a really cool cap on our exhibit. We're going to talk more about different elements of this, but that's really just a cursory overview of what the exhibit sort of looks like and some of the themes we've included. And I went through it really fast, but again, this is not a virtual tour. So Catherine, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Great. All right, so what's next? Catherine, well, take it away.
All right. So this is not a photo of vases on a windowsill. What you're looking at are small plastic cups, like solo cups, with sticky notes on them with people's names. Those people are our staff. And what's in the cups are scissors, levels, squeegees, X-Acto knives, measuring tapes, all the tools you would need to install an exhibition in the middle of a global pandemic. So when we install exhibitions at the History Center, it's often an all hands on deck endeavor for our team, especially of course, the exhibitions team, but also our collections team. Pam mentioned the two teams combined makes up the majority of the staff at our museum. So we really rely on them to ensure that our exhibitions are installed and up and running on time for the opening, because otherwise it would just be me and Pam and it would take a really long time. So anyway, so in order to install probably the largest in-house exhibition we've ever done in the midst of maintaining a 6-foot distance between staff, we had to really rethink our processes in regards to installing. So everybody got their own little installation kit, which is what you're pretty much looking at here, very low budget.
If you're wondering why Broadway over here on the right doesn't have a level, it's because I stole it. That's all. I just didn't want you to think we're shorting her a level.
I figured she had her own, but anyway, so so what that really meant for us was extending our installation time from typically about 1 month to 2 months, creating policies and procedures to ensure that staff were not interacting within a 6-foot distance from one another, and if they had to, limiting the amount of time and exposure that they did that, purchasing proper PPE for them. So we had, of course, everyone had to wear their face masks, but we had face shields. We had what I don't know why is called a bunny suit, which is essentially just coveralls that you wear if you're working in a close proximity, and then you take off and throw away when you're done. A lot of the elements in the exhibition could be a one-person task, but that large cabin in the center of the gallery that Pam had shown pictures of was one that required multiple people to be working on at the same time. And so it was really, I mean, in terms of challenges for this exhibition, this was one that was unexpected. Prior to coming in and starting the installation, we had all been teleworking. The museum closed down for about 2 months, I believe it ended up being. And so we were all used to working at home. We were all used to not being around anybody else. And then we got thrown back in the mix to ensure that we could open this exhibition. And then for any of you who have visited the museum, you'll see around the museum and in the Yesterday This Was Home gallery, we have stickers on the floor that show you where you should stand in order to maintain a safe distance from other people, and sanitation stations throughout the exhibition. We had to research proper sanitary cleaning materials for all of the touch screens, so the voting booths that Pam had mentioned previously. Every time a visitor comes through the gallery, our staff or volunteers follow behind them and wipe everything down for the next visitor to come through. So these are things, of course, we've been cleaning the museum since we opened, but really taking it to the next level is something that we were challenged to do in this new world that we all live in. So that's that. Next. I'm not sure what this is a picture of. You tell me, Pam. I can't hear you though, if you're talking.
It's because I'm muted.
Okay.
So this presentation has sort of a mix of just different photographs. So forgive us if we kind of like jump around a little bit, but I wanted to show everyone, for everyone who has been to the exhibit, this is what the space looks like pre-exhibit, right? The room is always like this weird white cream color, Arabian sand or something it's called, I don't remember, but this is what the room really usually looks like, is because 1 week it's a wedding and the next week it's an exhibition. And so if you've been to the Ocoee exhibit, you don't probably recognize this space. Those tape marks are how we start to figure out, where do the walls go? Do they go on this side of the column, or do they go on this side of the column? Where are our angles? I don't remember why my shoes are in the middle of the room. Those are my sandals.
I think you're marking the Mila wall. I think you're marking where the Mila wall would have been.
I was marking the Mila wall, but I don't understand why it was just like that. But either way, this is how we work. And that's our exhibits tech, Paul, probably judging me for my methodology here. But this is what the room looks like. And you just saw in those photographs, it doesn't look at all like the same space. And somehow in a couple of weeks, it goes back to looking like this. Down on the bottom, this is where we were trialing the colors, because at the end of the day, you can love a color on paper and it doesn't look the same when it's a paint, and it doesn't look the same when it's under the lights it's going to be in, and it doesn't look the same when it's on white background versus a dark background. And we actually decided, we're like, this is not the right blue, like a day before we were supposed to be painting. So we went out and got like 6 or 8 more cans of different blues to try to find the right blue. And so these are the colors that you see, except for the one on the left, the colors you saw in the exhibit. But it's all, sometimes we have to make really last minute decisions. And again, with COVID, it's not as easy as just saying, hey, run out and get some paint. It's who feels comfortable going to Home Depot right now?
Yeah.
And will I have a lot of stuff to carry, or should we just have them deliver it so we don't have to send a staff to the store so that we can be safe? A lot of those different conversations. And a lot of times, we have floor plans worked out and we think they're great. And then I come in and I'm like, no, move that tape. That's not going to work. So it's a challenging process.
Yeah. I mean, it is in a good day. It is in a non-pandemic world, but that is not, that's what's unique about this exhibition. Not only is it such a big and important exhibition for our organization, for the community, but it came with this very unique suite of challenges that I know other museums have faced as well. In fact, if I can plug our partnership with the Science Center, they hired us on to help them install their big blockbuster exhibition, Pompeii, as the artifact handlers. And they had to figure out how that was a landmark exhibition, or is a landmark exhibition for them as well. They wanted to move forward with it, but how do you do that? How do you install these huge ancient artifacts while maintaining 6-foot distance? I mean, Pam was there, so she could tell us exactly how, but.
Yeah, it was interesting. And one of the hardest parts is because that exhibit, because of the extraordinary artifacts from Pompeii that are in it, normally there is a group of skilled handlers that come from Europe with the exhibition, and it wasn't an option. And so they enlisted us as skilled artifact handlers here locally to go in and assist. And so, yeah, it's not like I can lift a 1,500-pound ancient statue by myself. I can't. And even some of the things are so fragile, they just require several sets of hands. So that's a really good point, Catherine, that they were trying to figure out staffing and cleaning protocols. And we all know kids love science centers and they're running all over, touching everything. So it has been a sort of a whole new world for museums too, in a lot of ways. But we went over and we helped install Pompeii, and we'll go over and we'll help deinstall it, because again, after the Science Center, it goes back. This is your last chance in North America to see this show. It's going back to Europe. So see it if you haven't yet, because it does close in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. But it's an excellent exhibition. It's an amazing topic, but we'll help pack that up and send it back, because again, the European team just cannot come. So we're all figuring this out.
Yeah. The show must go on. So we're just doing our best to make it happen.
Yeah, it's a good point. What's next? This is like Christmas. I have no idea what's next. Who made this PowerPoint?
Okay, I'll talk about this. So this is our conference room. This is where a board gathers every month, or every 2 months, to deliberate on the future of our exhibition. This is where we bring donors in to show them presentations. This is where our staff congregates for our all staff meetings. And then in 2020, this became a production fabrication space as well. So keeping staff distance from one another, we had to get pretty creative in finding different workspaces for them. So we essentially appropriated our conference room, I think our research library, another one of our meeting rooms, any space that was not occupied by another person or a specific function, we took over for this exhibition. And so the cabin that you see in the middle of the gallery, there are some cutout walls throughout the exhibition where you see this rough wood behind this very smooth, beautiful facade. All of that needed to be hand sanded, hand stained. We created, after a lot of trial and error, created this very special and specific formula to get just the right color of stain that looked like weathered old cabin that had been just sitting out there naturally fading in the sun and the elements. So you see one of our collection staff, Jeremy, treating some of the wood strips there in our conference room. So yeah, among the many challenges of this, creating this exhibition, figuring out where everybody was going to work safely and spread out. And that is what we did to the best of our ability. And
it is hard enough to breathe when you're varnishing and staining wood and wearing a mask, and it's hard to breathe. If you've not been a person who's had to sit at work all day in a mask, you know, it's hard and it's exhausting. And we're doing a lot of physical work, and in this case, we took things outside when we lit them on fire. But that, you know, that was part of it too. We wanted part of the cabin to have that sort of almost a ghost of the flames and the fire that Ocoee experienced, and had to do that outside, of course. But it was a lot of, okay, do the wood, put the wood on a cart, take the wood downstairs. Okay, take the wood outside. Now bring the wood back in. Okay, let it air out a little bit. Okay, now bring it back up to the second floor. Okay, now take it down and then cut it to size, because everything was cut to a specific. Our building's not square. The building was built in 1927. And so if I'm going to line a wall like you saw in the exhibit, it's not 10 foot. We can't cut every board at 10 foot because the wall might be 2.75 inches in at the top. So we have to measure every single thing. So our building is a unique challenge. And everybody just loves going up and down the stairs wearing a mask all day, right? And so we're going up and we're going down. Okay, you need to cut another 1/2 inches off of here, because it's just, it's again, another part of the challenges is even the historic building we're in and working around some of its weirdness. This is really just a process photo. I think sometimes people like to see how the cheese is made. This was sort of a unique thing for us. Catherine had, you know, we do a lot of research at the beginning of an exhibit, looking at like what feels right, what looks right, like what's going to look good. And like we research other exhibits, we look at trade shows, we look at nature center, we look at all sorts of different things for inspiration. And Catherine, I think, had found this really beautiful example of this wall that was sort of cut out and had this wood peeking behind it. And you'll see we carried that through the exhibit, but it was really meant to create sort of a shroud of mystery, right? You're always peering through at the next part of history, and you're always going from this sort of beautiful, clean cut, painted look to this sort of rough wood edge. So we had to figure out like what materials to use for this stuff. And I have a tendency to really look at, a lot of museums order this stuff done. They don't do it in-house. We do all of our own fabrication for the most part. So we build all of these things, as you can see. I look a lot at theater set design, because theater set designers are geniuses. They have every single sort of substrate and thing in their toolkit. And so that's actually how we ended up figuring out how to create this sort of like molded edge without using a ton of extra materials and things. So again, this is just process shots that you can see that we can't just build this wall. We have to build it, we have to fill it, and we have to let it dry. So we have to go do something else. Then we come back and we paint it, and then we have to let it dry. And then it needs another coat, and then we have to go away. And then we have to wait for these letters to come in. And then we have to figure out like, what is the material we use to have them stand off from the wall? And how do we measure all of that and make sure it's all straight? So
which color gold do we want? Because believe it or not, there are a lot of variations of gold and brass that we tested.
We went through 30 cans of spray paint trying to figure out what the heck colors. And, you know, we'd look at them downstairs and Catherine would be like, I love these two. And we go upstairs and she'd go, I hate those two. Because the light makes a big difference, you know? And we can fully set our lighting, which I think actually lends me to this next picture. Do you want to talk about lighting at all, Catherine, or do you want me to?
Go for it. Go for it.
So lighting makes a big difference. You'll see on the right, there's different zones. All of our lights are fully programmable. So there's different zones. We can have them be cooler, warmer, darker, lighter. We have to get up and actually adjust every single, my staff hates me on lighting day because they have to climb a ladder 10,000 times. That one needs to be a little left, a little down, a little up, a little right. Actually, no, put it back. I don't like it that way. It's really important. And Catherine and the exhibit staff did a ton of research trying to think about every single exhibit of how it should be lit. And originally we had planned this exhibit to be very dark with just these really bright spotlights. But then we ended up, the way that the content framed out, we needed a little bit more readability. We wanted it, again, to be very dark and sort of subdued and to have a lot of spotlights. But budget this year, you know, we had hoped to do a lot of fundraising for this exhibit. And when March hit and the pandemic, fundraising wasn't an option. We had to raise money to save our staff. So do we save our staff or do we get new spotlights? So we couldn't do it. We had to sort of reframe the entire way we wanted to light and build out this exhibit because we just didn't have the funding to do it. And that's always a little heartbreaking when you've got this plan, but we made it work. We looked at some different things. We used the spotlights we did have in the areas we thought it was the most impactful. But this exhibit, because the walls were so dark, we chose a very white color in there, a white light, a cool, and trying to get these different elements of lighting to match. So we have these light bulbs on top of the voting stations. We have these cutaway lights you see back in the left-hand side of that photo. And then we have the overall lights. And trying to get them to match is like impossible because nobody's incandescent's the same as this LED, as this light, as this white, as this warm, soft, whatever the heck that means. So it's really challenging to make sure that everything matches up when there's not like a one go-to place for all of these different types of products we're using. And so we do the best we can. If anybody's been to any of our Pulse Remembrance exhibits, the walls are always lighter colored. And so usually we use a softer, warmer light in those exhibits because we want you to feel comfortable in those rooms. We don't want it to feel cold or institutional. And so we use warm. However, the third year when we did the Pulse, it was a more of an art centric exhibit, the Love Speaks exhibit, we chose a whiter light. Why? Because it was artwork. And when you use a warm light, it changes the colors and the intentionality of that artwork. So these are really big things that we have to try to work through. And again, up and down ladders and moving a lot of stuff and trying to breathe in masks and everything. So
yeah, I will, before you move on, Pam, I will just point out in the foreground of the bigger picture, there is a wheelchair. So in the spirit of unexpected things happening during this exhibition, our very talented, very valuable collections manager was walking down the sidewalk, fell and broke her foot. So being the champ that she is, continued to work on the exhibition and the installation of the exhibition via that wheelchair. So it's just a really interesting time at the museum.
I should have put the photo in here. I almost did, and then I didn't. So it's funny you call it out. There's one of the first photos taken of this installation. That was the first day several people were on site. There's a photograph of Paul and I fixing this very wheelchair, which was like not in good shape, down in the workshop. So we were trying to fix it because she kept like veering off to the right. Yeah. So we're like, okay, we got to get our collections manager straight if we're going to get this thing done. So, you know, it's all in a day's work. But that was the first step to this installation, was fixing Broadway's wheelchair so that she could function. Oh, poor thing. Poor thing.
I know. She's a champ.
Do you want to talk about this a little bit, Catherine? I know we're getting close on time. We want to leave a lot of time for questions. Start putting your questions in the chat box now, y'all.
Yeah. So so these are just some more process shots. The larger one, which is on my left side, that's our archivist, Whitney. She's mounting some of the vinyl panels in the background there. Just, you know, coordinating how everybody can work safely, but effectively. And this is just sort of an inside snapshot of some of our workspaces, which are not always designed ideally. So when preparing for large exhibitions like this one, as I mentioned with the lumber, we tend to take up a lot of space in the museum and really just find any flat surface or any pinnable surface where we can store some of these printed materials until we're ready to move them upstairs and put them on the wall. But you see Whitney there with her mask on, working in the exhibition space with lots of stuff around her. And that's kind of a pretty typical, mask or no mask, pretty typical scene when we're preparing. And then the other photo on the right, the smaller photo, is also a member of our collections team. And she's just preparing to mount a photo of Emmett Till and his mother that we received on loan from, I believe it was the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And that was one of the images that we had outsourced in terms of production. So Pam is correct in that 90% of what we do with our exhibitions, we do in-house. 90% of what we create, we're doing it ourselves. But some of the larger format images that you'll see in the exhibition, or the specialty cutout images that you see, we work with a really great production house here in Orlando to create some of those specialty items. But, you know, Alexandria, who's holding up that picture of Emmett Till, you know, she's an oral historian. She, I don't know if she took this job assuming she would be installing exhibitions, but I just want to say that everybody on our collections and exhibitions team have become very talented installers, and whatever they go do after this museum, if they ever leave, and I hope they don't, they've got all that new skill set in their pockets now that they can use if they so choose.
We do a lot of cross training with our staff, and our staff is awesome that they love that. They go from being an oral historian to saying, yeah, teach me how to use this stuff. Or, hey, here's a torch, have fun in the back parking lot. So really, really incredible. So Miss Nana Pat in the chat just asked about if we have audio of descendants telling their story, and that's the next part of this little presentation. We have a wall in the exhibit where we talk about the long dark legacies of Ocoee, and how after Ocoee happened, it wasn't over. That this had an impact on all of these families for the rest of their lives. They were walking out of Ocoee with nothing. They had to start over. Their homes had been burned. They'd been traumatized, all sorts of things. And that has a lot of generational impacts. So we've been very, very honored to meet several descendant families. I want to say we're up to 9 or 10 now. I have to count again, of probably around 80. So we have a lot more to meet. But we wanted to make sure we featured them in the exhibition. We wanted to show the faces of people who survived this and somehow came out on the other side to start a new life. And they did. They built new homes. They started new groves. And had children and raised their families. And so like Patricia, who's on this call, when we find these families, we try to talk to them. This is their story, not the history centers. This is a story that belongs to them, that their families experienced. And so we've done oral histories with them and have recordings of that. So while we can't use all of that in the exhibit because there's a lot, I think my oral histories with Pat it was 9 hours long. We did it in sections over a weekend. We had coffee too, but you'll see we have quotes. We wanted the descendants' voices to come out because of the pandemic. You know, the plan had been to bring them all to see the exhibit and to let them all meet. But because of the pandemic, that hasn't been possible. And these people are spread all over the nation. They're in California and New York and Pennsylvania. And so flying just isn't an option for everybody. So we do have some audio of individuals speaking. We have these quotes on the wall, but we will also have the full audio available to listen to at our museum into perpetuity. In 100 years, people can go and listen at the 200-year mark and listen to these stories of these descendants today and the impact this has had. So I wanted to share a couple of photos of people who have managed to come to the exhibit. Down here on the left, I kind of lined them up with their families. So these are some of the descendants of the Hickey family. We've met and toured with probably some 35 members of the Hickey family from all over the nation, whether that's virtually or on site. These individuals are local and they're awesome community members. The young woman on the far right is a co-owner in Dodge and Eats, which is an excellent local restaurant. She's also in the realtor business. And her husband, a couple people down, is part of the Haitian Chamber of Commerce. So just really cool. They all have their own cool stories, right? But they also were learning a lot about this event for the first time. In the middle, we have descendants of the Hammer family, Miss Jacqueline Felder and her daughter, which are cousins to Patricia, who's in our chat. She is, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, 93? But they came down and saw the exhibit, which was really, really exciting. And she told me a lot and she learned a lot. And it's been really amazing to, I guess, give some pieces of this story back to the families or to give them more information. On the far right, we have Dr. Peterson, who is a descendant of the Hightower family. And he lives in Georgia. And so these are just a fraction of the families. She's 95. Jacqueline Felder is 95. Look at how lovely she is. She just came and she just walked right on through. And they were wearing masks. FYI, they only took them off quickly for this photograph. But just really incredible people. And so we've been so honored to get to meet them and talk with them and to also provide, hey, these are the land deeds from your family. These are documents that we've been able to find and to have this dialogue. And so one of the things we're hoping and we're working on is trying to plan a virtual meeting of those descendant family members. A lot of individuals would like to meet other families who've been through this so that they can talk about that. But there's also an upcoming conversation about reparations. Everybody in the chat probably knows what reparations are, and that was originally proposed with the House bill. That eventually went through. The House bill went through for education, which now mandates that this topic will be taught in all of Florida's classrooms. But the reparations part was left behind because they didn't think it would pass. Now they're redrafting that bill to potentially try to figure out some way to give back to the families for the land that was lost. Now, reparations can happen a lot of different ways, but the first steps are talking about it and getting together. In the case of the Rosewood Massacre, they had a claim bill. They did receive some money. There's scholarships. And so there's some different ideas about what that might look like, but we're hoping to help get the families together to be able to have that conversation. Because again, these people are all over the nation. And there's no good way to organically have them meet. They're not all still in Ocoee because everybody left. So we've been very honored to meet as many of the families as we have. And like I said, it's about 10 out of what we think we're probably around 80 individual family groups living in Ocoee. So we'll continue to look, and sometimes they continue to find us. So
Pam, you mentioned that when we set out to endeavor on this project, it was about 3 years ago, and a lot of work, a lot of time and energy has been invested by the History Center and by some of our partners and some of our colleagues like Francina and the Democracy Forum folks. But really, in many cases, I feel like our work has just begun as well. And thinking about what the legacy of, now we have all of this. We had less information when we started, even when we were hanging the panels on the wall and we opened the exhibition. We have more now than we did then. And so do you want to talk a little bit about how we intend to use some of these materials that we've gathered and that we're going to continue to gather, because our research is not over. Even when the exhibition closes, and Pam mentioned it will be extended into March, so you have a little bit more time to come and visit. What happens? What happens to all that stuff?
That's something that's different for every exhibit. We definitely want to extend the life of this exhibit. We've done a lot of research. Catherine mentioned earlier our master plan to redesign the whole museum. A lot of this history is just going to move over to the other side of the museum. We've done a lot of really good work that this will start to get infused into those permanent exhibits. A big thing that we're trying to do is to raise money. Right now, we're trying to raise $50,000 to be exact, to build a long-form digital storytelling website. Now, we're talking like interesting and interactive, not like boring, snoring text on the wall. But we want to build this nice interactive website to help with that House bill that passed, but to also make this exhibit accessible to everyone across the nation, across the world. And so taking all of this content, the interactives, the voting stations, the resources, everything we built, and putting it into that website. So we're working with a lot of different foundations in the city and the county to try to raise that money. If you would like to give or participate in any way, whether it's $1, $5, or $10, nothing's too little and nothing's obviously too much. But you can go to the exhibit webpage, the Ocoee exhibit webpage, and there's a donate button. And we've had several individuals give to that already, but that's the best way that we can make this exhibit content really accessible. We have teachers up in the Panhandle asking us for curriculum resources. We did design a curriculum, and we have designed a youth and family guide. And all of this is also available bilingual. We have the full text in Spanish and in English. And somebody asked in the chat if we worried that there was too much text in this exhibit for museum visitors, especially children. We constantly worry about too much text. So what we do is we do levels. If you walk through this exhibit and you only read the quotes, the big quote banners, you will have learned something and probably felt something because they are important. But if you read only the biggest text, you'll learn something. And so we do a tier of text size. Now, does this exhibit have too much text? 10,000%. Probably twice as much text as it should. We felt we were doing a disservice by not letting people read it if they wanted to. And we have found people are spending 6 and 7 hours in this exhibit reading it. People are coming back 3 and 4 times. So there's different ways to look at it. There's, do we want everyone who comes to read everything? They're not going to anyway. We know this about museums. Or do we put it out there for the people who do want it? And if we don't put it, what if someone's more interested in that than that? So these are constant conversations. But in terms of the youth, that's why we created a youth and family guide. So that's an in-hand booklet you can pick up at the beginning and walk through with. And it has those main points that you should hit in the exhibit. And it also has pointers on how caregivers or educators can talk with youth about that. So it's never a perfect system. You know, it's never perfect. It's a lot of words. People have spent time, but come back. You know, what have you got to do for 3 Saturdays? Sort of a thing. But again, that's also the point of, if we can put this into a website, people can come back as many times as they want and see it and focus on just the parts they want to focus on. There's talk that we might try to have parts of this go to other museums, but it's really expensive to try to do that, and most museums don't have any funding right now. So we're working on a lot of different ways to continue the life of this content.
Yeah, but the collecting for sure is not over. So I think we'll just continue to do that forever.
Yep. I'm going to shut off my electronic vacuum if you'd like to talk about upcoming opportunities.
Sure. Okay, so as we had already mentioned a couple of times, the exhibition has been extended. It was originally intended to close on February 14th, and now the last day that you can visit will be March 7th. So there's a little bit more time to come and visit. I should also mention that unprecedented for the History Center, this exhibition requires a timed ticket. So you can just purchase your tickets online. You can call the museum. We're just prescribing set time to visit to ensure that we're providing enough space, distance between visitors and groups coming in. I believe it's every 30 minutes. It's very easy to do. You can also do it when you come in, but I do recommend doing it ahead of time if you're able to. So March 7th, you have more time to come and visit. And we also do have more programs between now and then. One of our free family days is coming up on February 6th. And then we also have, as part of the exhibition, I will say, thanks to the Florida Humanities Council, we received a very generous grant from them to provide free public programming in conjunction with this exhibition. And so included in that program, we have done a Celebrating Black Culture series. So the last event of that series is on February 11th. It'll also be a virtual event, and you can grab that information from our website. I'm sure you can also find it on Facebook, and maybe that's where you found this event as well. But that will be about storytelling and poetry, specifically Black storytelling and poetry. We have a lot of tours. We have school groups and university groups coming in. Those are always available if you wanted to book those. Again, through our website, I dropped a link in the chat for you to click around. But we want to know what you want to see. What we have more time now with this exhibition. We have the opportunity to do programs on the Ocoee Massacre, on Black history in the future. So if you have ideas, drop them in the chat. If you have more questions, drop them in the chat while we have a few minutes left of our presentation.
Yeah, extending the exhibit's given us a little more time. One thing that we are doing, we have recorded like a full virtual tour. And so we're hoping to do a, like we'll sort of show that. It's hard to like walk through and do it live because the technology and the timing is just like blah. But OCTV, Orange County TV, has made a tour for us that's recorded, and it'll bring some of the documents and the text panels and pictures like up closer. So we are planning to do a full event like that. So if you're somebody who cannot come to Orlando or are just not ready to go to the museum yet, we are going to be trying to do a virtual tour where we do it like that. And then Catherine and I will probably be there available at the end to answer any like additional questions. So that's something to keep an eye out. That's not, it's not scheduled just yet because we were kind of waiting to see how things were going, with COVID, but also with if we could expand or not, or extend. So that'll be getting on the calendar. Do watch our exhibits page, which Catherine put in the chat, and throw your questions at us. We've got one here. Have you seen an increase in the number of Black visitors to the museum because of the exhibit? Yes, 1,000,000%. Mm-hmm. I don't have those actual numbers. We don't track demographics on all of our visitors. I wish that was something that was easier for us to do so that we could make sure that we are appealing to our entire community and making sure a big initiative of ours after over the last 5 years has been what we call in the field decolonizing the museum, which is making sure that all of our exhibition narratives, our plans, our programs are more reflective of our entire community. And this exhibit has had a much higher Black visitation for us. We have a really good mix of demographics who come to our museum, but this one obviously has been much more in depth in terms of the exhibit topic. Right now, our entire second floor is Black history. It's the Highwaymen. We've got our permanent exhibit on Black history, which is does cover some similar, but a lot of different to what we have in the Ocoee exhibition. So that's been wonderful that people are coming in to learn the local history and try to see how this place came to be what this place is, right? Because that's what all of history is. So that has definitely been the case. Mm-hmm. Our attendance has been surprisingly on par with other years. So where we expected to see a big increase, and I think we would have without the pandemic, we've held steady, and luckily we've been able to do that safely by that timed entry and spreading people out. But that's been really surprising for us. Our programming has zoomed. We're getting 125% of the people in programming. And I think that's one part the topic and the timeliness, but it's also one part the fact that we've now figured this out, right? We're able to do this also virtually. And so more people can come because not everyone can come down to the museum on a Saturday morning, right? And sometimes we did an oral history workshop. We had people from like 25 countries come, which was awesome. If we had done that on site, we never would have even connected with those people. But in this new virtual world, so it's pros and cons.
So we have another question. Does this museum have a relationship with other museums in the area, either through professional organizations or affiliate groups? Definitely. We just in this exhibition alone, we've worked with the Moore Cultural Complex, which is the site of Harry and Harriet Moore, whose house was bombed in Mims, Florida. Really a sort of catalyzing moment in the civil rights movement, not just locally, but nationally. We worked with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture with this exhibition in loans and some of the resources that they have that you'll see in the exhibition. We partner with OMA. We have an annual program that we do every year, Highwaymen Kids. We're actually doing more Zoom programming with them this month, February, and I think into March, talking about museums. And go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, it's Danielle asking this question, if you're somebody who's interested in museums, or just like generally, you don't have to be a museum staff or like an exhibit designer to be interested. This new partnership that Catherine is going to mention with OMA, Musing Over Museums, is open right now. It's going to be starting in just a couple of weeks. But do you want to, I guess I'll explain that because I probably have, but Musing Over Museums is a partnership with the Orlando Museum of Art. And what it is a conversation series So over a couple of months, like almost every Tuesday, but not exactly, in the evening, we'll have a program. And Oma will speak, and we'll speak, and it's over different museological topics, right? But again, you don't have to be a museum staff person. You can just like museums to go. It's actually sort of aimed at that. But we'll talk about like, what is a museum? Why are we in these like crazy old like Roman looking buildings or Greek looking temples? Why are we, what is the new life of museums with things like the ice cream museum, the pop-up photographic expositions and things like that? So we'll look at what role do museums play in a community's healing? What role do they play when there's protests in the street? So it's, again, a conversation series. There'll be like a small lecture and then a conversation at the end. And Catherine's going to be kicking that off. What's the first date, Catherine?
January 19th.
Oh, so that's coming right on up.
I know.
So you better get ready for that, Catherine.
I know.
But you can go to Oma's Orlando Museum of Art's webpage, and you can sign up for that. It's a series. So we do a lot of different things, not only just like on a general basis. We are part of these different affiliate groups with a lot of the local museums, but very specifically, every time we do an exhibit or a program, we're trying to create that synergy. So.
And then we have a partnership locally with the Wells-Built Museum of American History and Culture, which is not too far from our museum. And then I think, Joy, maybe you're referring to the Florida Museums Association, FMA, where it's
she's talking about the local Historical Cultural Alliance.
Gotcha.
So just in the last couple of years, the History Center helped to spearhead bringing together. We have so many awesome small institutions, right? We have big ones, but we have small ones, a lot of local historical societies, historic house museums, gardens, right, that have some sort of historic structure. And so the History Center helped to spearhead bringing those groups together, and they meet on a regular basis, and they go to each other's sites, because the more we're familiar with other museum sites, the more we can help steer people. If you come to my museum and you say, hey, I liked this, what else would you recommend? Well, I'm going to recommend you go over to Lou Gardens and see the Lou House. Or I'm going to invite you to go see the MIMS Cultural Complex over in MIMS if you're headed out towards the coast. So the more well-informed we are about our peers, our colleagues, and partners, the more we can help steer people and garner these sorts of relationships. So there's a lot of things going on.
Yes, for sure.
So, yeah.
I dropped a link to any of the previous programs that we've done that have been recorded. So feel free to watch any of those, pop a bag of popcorn, sit down and enjoy.
Another question, have teachers asked for a virtual tour and discussion for their students? Is there a partnership with the local school board? Yes, we're working on that. There have been requests from all over the state. We've had requests from Iowa, from colleges up there who want our curriculum and who want content from us. Colleges here, high schools, elementary schools. So like I said, we've created that curriculum and that youth and family guide, and we're working on another curriculum. We're going to work on this website, but we're working with a lot of teachers. We had been working with the Orange County Public Schools to bring a ton of the different high school classes to the exhibit as like everybody's going to see this. You're going to come, you're going to learn it, whether you like it or not, sort of a thing. But then the pandemic hit and there were no field trips. And for a while, they weren't even allowing virtual field trips because everyone was just trying to figure out what the heck was going on and how they were going to teach. Teachers deserve a lot of awards this year. Mm-hmm. And what we've tried to do is to make this content really accessible. And we haven't had to go to teachers yet. I mean, we've been working on that, but the teachers are self-selecting. Like they've been keeping an eye on the fact that this House Bill 1213 has gone through, and they want to get ahead of the game. They want to say, yeah, we need to be teaching the Ocoee Massacre. But we've also had some people say, I don't know how to teach the Ocoee Massacre. I'm not trained in psychology and social work and handling some of these difficult conversations with my students. And I don't know if my students go home and talk about what they're going to bring back in terms of baggage the next day from their parents, right? It's not easy topics to teach. You never know how it's going to go over with either the student or the conversation they might have with their parents that night. So we, like I said, we've created the youth and family guide, and we're creating a lot of materials. And that's an ongoing thing. In any other year, this would have been different. I think we would have had every local high school group in this building or in the history center, not my house. I don't want that. But in the history center. So it's ongoing. And if anybody has connections or knows of anybody who's interested in content, please let us know, because we're happy to work with them. So
let's see. I'll repost
so
the
in terms
links.
of, what's that?
I'll repost the links. Pam, if you want to address Troy's
Yeah.
question.
So Troy said, think this would make an exhibit a great online course. So that we've not done that like specifically, like it's not a thing that you can like click on demand, but you can schedule it with us. We have it facilitated. So we've done this with Rollins College, where they watch like our virtual tour, and then there's a facilitated conversation and things like that. We of course have the curriculum. When we get all of this posted, some of this has been like trying to create and get it all done. But our education department is going to be selling that to schools. Like, hey, you guys can sign up for this and do the tour, the facilitated conversation. It's, before, we call these things like museum in a box, right? It's a box you can actually like check out. But in this case, it's an online virtual program. So I think we're going to continue to keep like developing what that looks like, especially when it comes to different age levels and individuals who want to do it. But we're kind of doing that. It's not structured exactly the same way, but that's exactly right. There's going to be a lot of parts. There's going to be the website. There's going to be the curriculum and the youth guide that are posted to go with the website. And then there's going to be a whole series of all the programming we've done that you can click on virtually. But then there's also the option for a facilitated school program with our education department. So a lot of different options and versions there.
Okay, we have 3 questions. What have we done to stay afloat financially in the wake of the pandemic to cover our staff and operational costs?
Begged. A lot of writing. We're really unique. We're a public-private nonprofit partnership between Orange County government and the society. And where you might think we're covered by Orange County government, a lot of our staff are society, and it doesn't work like that. So while half of our staff were safe, half of our staff were not. They were facing hour cuts, layoffs. And so that was part of the issue with Ocoee. Again, Catherine and I would have spent a lot of time grant writing or meeting funders to try to get a big level, like a $50,000 sponsorship for this exhibit. We stopped everything we were doing and we figured out how to make the exhibit work otherwise. And Catherine and our other curator, Leslie, and we stopped what we were doing. We started writing grants. And we started soliciting donations to keep that staff. And we had a very generous, both volunteer and donor, who said, I will give you $5,000 if the board will match it. And then he said, you know what, I'll give you $7,000 if the board will match it. And he has since done that again. So museums are funded in a lot of ways. Though we get government funding, it didn't mean we were safe. There wasn't more government funding for us to get just to cover the other side of the operation. We did see a very short period of time where we had to have hours cut for staff, but we tried to subsidize that in other ways. We did get some grants. We did get the PPE, the payroll protection. There's another round of that coming out. So if you're a museum who needs help, you need to keep an eye on that payroll protection if you're eligible. It's out there, right? The second round. So you just need to pay attention and see when you're eligible to actually drop your application and apply for that payroll protection. And at the end of the day, sometimes you have to take out a small business loan. And it's terrible for a nonprofit to ever have to take a loan. But those are some of the things we've done, trying to be inventive. We did an experience auction. So we came up with these different like fun things you could buy, these activities that you could buy, whether that was a couple hours of doing genealogy with me, or a behind the scenes offsite tour, or a pioneer cooking class. We came up with these sort of fun experiences that you could bid on. And so that wasn't a ton of money, but it made a few $1,000s. And we did that for Christmas, right? So people could buy interesting gifts. And I think we'll do that again. You know, we'll keep building on that. But we just left no stone unturned. And that's probably a longer answer than you wanted. But since you're from a museum, I wanted to give you an answer I thought might actually be able to give you some food for thought on that. But we looked in a lot of places.
Yeah, and we're always trying to strike the balance between accessibility, providing free programming, free access to our resources, materials, exhibitions, and monetizing those things to ensure that we're able to keep the lights on and fund the resources, fund the research, and so on. So it's always this balance that we're trying to strike between ensuring that all people of all backgrounds can come and experience our programs, but making sure we can pay the staff that deliver those programs.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have a phone app, or are we using a phone app to display our exhibits and influence digital content?
Not currently. It is something that we've discussed with our master plan. Not so much using an app within the museum, but using it outside of. So finding an app as a way to be an extension of our museum. We as a staff, museums feel very differently about this across the board. We as a staff have decided we don't want somebody like this in our museum all of the time in their app or their iPad or whatever. Now it can augment learning. We understand that. We want you to come. We want to build experiences that you want to have. We want you to have something different than when you're sitting at home on the couch, right? We want you to have a reason. So that's sort of the way we're kind of thinking about that going forward. There's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of really great apps in museums. We just currently don't have that set up, but eventually we're hoping to use it as an extension. So when you're out on the street, you can look at photos from our collection next to the building that is there now, or you can, whatever it is, right? So it's something we're talking about, not something we're currently doing. And a lot of that's a matter of timing and projects and funding.
And then beyond Facebook, what other forms of social media do we use to advertise our exhibits and their unveilings?
We use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I don't, maybe we have Pinterest. I don't know. I don't think so. Those are the main ones we use. And we use mostly the same content across those platforms. We don't have like we do a little bit of something different. You know, things have to be differently shaped or differently written for certain platforms. But we use those and they are very valuable. Facebook is probably the one that we get the most attention on. But that's something we're still working on. It's a changing game when it comes to social media. So we're still trying to figure out the best ways to use it too.
And then an idea for a program or a program consideration, programming that focuses on voter rights suppression and how our election process came about and has evolved with various legislation, because the past week has revealed just how much misinformation and lack of education is present. Yeah, it's an interesting process for sure. It's been a very interesting week for sure. We did a program, not quite what you're referring to here, but we did a program in the beginning of the exhibition that did talk about voting and the history of voting. We also invited the League of Women Voters there. It was right that first opening weekend, I believe, in October. So it was before the 2020 election, where we were encouraging families, we were encouraging teens who were of the voting age, and others to come and register to vote if they haven't, learn more about voting and the voting processes and the history of voting in the South and Central Florida and Florida. So I think that's a really great idea to break down. It is a complex system and really break down the facts in very digestible ways. So Danielle, thank you for suggesting that. Let me scroll down a little bit. Mathis, I'll reply to you separately.
I just emailed you, Mathis.
Great.
Yeah, I just emailed him. So we'll set up a time to chat about that. We're happy to help any way that we can in terms of giving tips or whatever we can do.
Museums are stronger when they partner, and we're very open to that. Okay, are there any other questions? Any other program ideas?
I know we're over, but this is also very interesting. Feel free to go.
Talking. We could keep talking to you all day.
Yeah, I wish you could do like webinar where we don't have to look at y'all while we're doing the thing. But then I wish we could like click it. Is that a thing? Can you do that? Can we make it so we can actually look at you folks? I don't know. We need to figure Zoom's not perfect. But it would be really great if we could like turn it to conversation. So if you've got other questions, comments, do drop them in the box. We can stick around a few more minutes here. And Mathis, we can talk about the app and stuff too when we check out.
Thank you, Joy. I hear you're coming to visit soon, so we'll be glad to see your friendly face in our museum.
Great. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we thank you so much for attending on a Saturday morning. We hope you enjoyed it. Keep in mind, there is the recorded Coffee with a Curator. If you'd like more on like the design behind the scenes, you know, it's just kind of whatever. And a lot of other really great programming if you're interested in this topic or behind the scenes at museums. Do look at some of our upcoming things. Excuse me. And always feel free to reach out if you have ideas for programming. Yeah. So thank you all.